What's up, my delicious weirdos? This is Xander here, and I'm flying awkwardly solo for the XANDER Stone podcast's very first mini XANISODE. And keeping with this week's episode 2 theme of vampires, I thought I'd tell you the tale of a real-life vampire. Sometime in the 17th century, a gentleman with the most unfortunate name met with the most tragic of circumstances, Mr. Johannes Cuntius, and yes, that is his real name. Can you even imagine the nicknames he got for that one? If you don't believe me, check out the show notes for the links to the sites where I did my research. Mr. Cuntius, known as the Vampire of Petsch, which is an historical region in Central Europe called Silesia, mostly in Poland, but with nooks and crannies in the Czech Republic and Germany, Mr. Cuntius was fatally kicked by one of his horses while he and his servant were trying to shoe the horse, because, you know, that's how you roll in the 1600s. Some accounts say that he was kicked in the head, but a few have suggested that he was kicked in the other head. The head a ways south from your neck. On occult.com it says, and I quote, "He was kicked in the groin and fell ill," which makes absolutely perfect sense to me, while other accounts seem to agree that it was a hoof to the noggin. After this blow to his dome, he took to his bed, as one would, and in his final hour, he did a bit of soul-searching, a bit of self-realization about the life that he had led and the sins which he exclaimed were bigger than all the sins in the world. Hashtag dramatic much. He eventually succumbed to his injuries, but, sneaky bugger, wouldn't stay dead, would he? Cuntius was said to have made a pact with the devil on his deathbed. The local townfolk also said that before he had become quite suddenly wealthy, his youngest son had just disappeared, so it's rumored that he had sold his son to Satan. When Cuntius's soul left his body, a cold wind arose, generating a dark mist. His oldest son said at the time of his father's death, a black cat appeared from the mist. Some say it came from the mist, others say that it just ran into the room when he died, but either way, it attacked Cuntius's face, mauling him very severely. And that same nippy black breeze arose during his funeral, and it did not subside until his coffin was put into his tomb. As a wealthy and highly regarded local resident, his friends and families, hoping to nullify some of his sins, thought it best that he would be buried within the church's holiest of holies, in a tomb right next to the altar. Obviously, this didn't work. A day or two was all it took until the rumors started to work their way around town, and folks were whispering that an incubus in the form of Cuntius was forcing itself upon women. His widow also claimed that Cuntius appeared to her at night, demanding to share her bed with him, which is the polite 1600s way of saying he wanted some post-demise hanky-panky. But when she undead cock-blocked him, he decided to get his freak on with other women because, you know, men, right? Go figure. The women in the surrounding area claimed that when the undead Cuntius's hands touched him, they were as cold as ice. I would have thought that just the fact that they were being manhandled by the undead was bad enough, but apparently we only draw the line at cold hands. It's okay if you're undead, just for God's sake, Cuntius, warm your hands up. Reports of poltergeist-like disturbances and activity started appearing around Chateau de Cuntius. Objects were being flung around by unseen forces, people were being beaten while they were sleeping, and of course, let's not forget the posthumous fiddles with the chilly fingers. Unidentifiable and inexplicable footprints started to appear that looked neither like man nor beast around the Cuntius household, and strange noises could be heard at night, sometimes so loud that they made the whole house shake. Other surrounding townspeople also began to experience some pretty weird shit. Jugs of milk and water were being turned into blood, children were going missing from their cradles at night, and the priest and the altar boy's linens were found stained with blood at the local church. I'm not even going to touch the Catholic conspiracy theories right now. Let's keep moving on. All the village dogs were also losing their shit and barking every night, and the reports just got weirder and weirder with every passing week. On closer inspection of his tomb, there were also signs of vampirism around the grave, with mouse-sized holes that were found leading to the coffin. If the holes were filled up, they just appeared again by the next morning. The villagers, obviously now growing increasingly concerned, eventually decided to check in on old Cuntius in his tomb. They found that his body was perfectly preserved, even reporting that his eyes would open and shut as though he were blinking, and that his hands could grasp at a staff tightly when they put one in them. It seemed that their suspicions had been proven correct. He was indeed a vampire, and thus his corpse must be consigned to the flames. According to Montague Summers' quote in The Vampire in Europe, His skin was tender and florid, his joints not at all stiff, but limber and movable, and a staff being put into his hand, he grasped it with his fingers very fast. His eyes, also of themselves, would be one time open and another time shut. They opened a vein in his leg, and the blood sprang out fresh as the living. His nose was entire and full, not sharp, as in those that are ghastly sick or quite dead. And yet Cuntius, his body had been laid in the grave from February 8th to July 20th, almost half a year. His body, when it was brought to the fire, proved unwilling to burn as before to be drawn, so that the executioner was fain with hooks to pull him out, cut him into pieces, and make him burn, which, while he did, the blood was found so pure and spirituous that it spurted into his face as he cut him. But at last, not without the expense of 215 great billets, all was turned to ashes, which they carefully sweeping up together and casting them into the river, the spectre never more appeared. End of quote. So, was Mr. Johannes Cuntius an undead vampire? Most of the folks at the time seemed to think that he was. Skeptics, on the other hand, might consider this case to be a dismissible piece of folklore conjured up by illiterate peasants. Equally, and probably more disturbing explanation could be argued for. The Cuntius, far from being a vampire, was actually still alive, sent into a coma after he got kicked in the head with a horse, which sounds like a very reasonable explanation. Being placed in a church tomb rather than buried in soil, there might have been just enough oxygen to keep him oxygenated and alive after his presumed passing. After he was found looking a bit undead vampire-y and declared an unnatural abomination, the local gossip mill got to work and poor Mr. Cuntius was declared a vampire. Whatever the case, vampire or not, the same miserable conclusion was ultimately reached for poor Cuntius. Butcher him up, set him on fire, kill it with fire! A Cuntius barbecuous, if you please. And that, my delicious lovelies, is the story of the vampire of Petsch, Mr. Johannes Cuntius. I'm going to do a big thank you to Paul Keegan, a listener from Ningbo in China. Hey, Paul! For his epic roast chicken dinners, and also for letting me know about the tragic tale of this real-life vampire with a very amusing name. If you enjoyed this week's episodes, and you enjoy a bit of a chuckle along with your paranormal weirdness, go ahead and give the old subscribe button a bash, and you'll get immediate updates on our latest episodes. We will be oh so very chuffed. You can also follow us on Instagram, where I post content like my life depends on it, and where you can get to see the faces behind the microphones. Our Instagram handle is at XANDER STONE Podcast, all one big word. I'll go and spell it for you, so pause this now and go and grab a pen or a stone tablet and a chisel or an Etch-a-Sketch or whatever it is you need. XANDERSTONEPODCAST at XANDER STONE Podcast. And of course, we would adore to hear your weird stories, your experiences, your paranormal encounters, or just say hi. Send us an email at xanderstonepodcast@gmail.com. All the links to connect with us and the links that verify that Cuntius is in fact a real name, you'll find in the show notes below. And coming up next week on the Xander and Stone podcast, Xander and Stone are going to be exploring the end of the world. So stay tuned for that one coming out next week. Mwah! Love you, bitches.